Oh, I did hit record. Luke, I was going to ask you to do that, but I just
Yep.
did. We're recording, and today we're going to be doing compliance through the investment criteria. Welcome, everyone. And James Witherington will be your instructor today. Thanks, James.
Yep. Thanks, Judy. So like Judy said, we're going to be going through compliance to the investment criteria. Next slide, Dylan. All right. So I think quite a few of you are probably familiar with this slide going through. So this slide represents our agency's purpose. Commerce touches on every aspect of community and economic development, from serving communities by providing grants for homeless programs or small businesses, building infrastructure, and growing the economy to promoting public safety. Commerce strengthens communities. Next slide. So this is just a quick overview of what our current staffing levels look like. If any of you have been dealing with commerce now for probably the last, say, 7 or 8 months, which is about how long I've been with commerce now, and recognize that we have definitely staffed up quite a bit. And to give a little intro, my name is James Witherington. I work on the technical assistance team under Luke Howard, and I'm a technical specialist for the team. And a little bit of heads up, I am an economist by trade, so I do like to get into the numbers. Next slide. So we have quite a bit of an agenda today. One thing I want to get across really clearly up front is that there's going to be a lot more technical language in this presentation than perhaps some of the previous ones that we've done. This is specific to the investment criteria, which includes the energy audits, simple payback, and life cycle cost analysis, measurement and verification, looking at conditional compliance. So there's quite a bit here. Next slide, please. Right, so this is just a general basic slide here on the standard. The standard's based on ASHRAE 100, which covers energy efficiency in existing buildings. It's a reference standard. Commerce has developed amendments to the standard 100 to conform with the clean buildings legislation. These amendments can be found under WAC 194-50. You can also find an integrated document developed by ASHRAE that incorporates all state amendments into standard 100, and a link to this document can be found on our Clean Buildings website. Next slide. All right, so for the investment criteria, we're really talking tier 1 buildings. The following slide represents all of the requirements for tier 1 buildings. So tier 1 buildings require benchmarking, the development and implementation of an energy management plan, an operation and maintenance program, and then you have different compliance pathways. Today, we're just talking about the investment criteria. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the roles and responsibilities of individuals who are going to be working really to help building owners meet compliance. And they're qualified person, qualified energy auditor, and an energy manager as well. Keep wanting to put qualified before every word. To give a little context here, this presentation today is really meant for qualified energy auditors and energy managers. A lot of what we're talking about today will be specific to what work they'll be conducting. Obviously, if you're a building owner or a qualified person, feel free to stick around, listen in. There's probably gonna be a lot of good questions, hopefully being thrown around here. But like I said, today, the real focus is a qualified energy auditor and energy manager. Next slide, please, Dylan. All right, the following slide shows an outline of the Clean Building Performance Standard and the structure to the standard. Today, we're really looking at areas that touch on Section 8, energy audit requirements, Section 9, implementation and verification, and normative Annex X, which deals with the investment criteria. Next slide, please. So going back to technical language, one of the things that always gets thrown around a lot are acronyms. And so I wanted to provide a quick little list of some acronyms that are going to be used pretty widely throughout here. I think if you've been working in this area, EUI and EUIT aren't that unfamiliar. LCCA is just life cycle cost analysis. And that's laid out in normative Annex X. Simple payback, or SPB, is what we'll be talking about a little bit later on today. And you'll notice the definition here is the estimated incremental additional cost of an EEM divided by the estimated annual cost savings of the measure expressed in years. Additionally, we'll be talking about EEMs, so energy efficiency measures. And we talk about M&V, so measurement and verification. Next slide, please. Right, so getting into the actual investment criteria performance metric. The investment criteria performance metric must be pursued to gain compliance with the Clean Buildings building standard when the energy use intensity cannot be calculated in accordance with section 5.2. An EUI target cannot be calculated in accordance with section 7.2, or the EUI target for a building cannot be met through cost-effective energy efficient measures. Next slide, please. One of the first steps, obviously beyond benchmarking and determining that you're going down the investment criteria pathway, really is conducting an ASHRAE Level 2 energy audit. And these audits should be performed by a qualified energy auditor as defined by the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. And you'll see the actual definition here within this slide that lists out the different credentials that you could use to qualify as a qualified energy auditor. Next slide, please. So as part of the energy audit process, near the end of the process, you will have developed EEMs potentially for your building. And each EEM will have a base case scenario and an alternative case scenario. The base case scenarios include all costs for energy operations and maintenance and other related costs scheduled in the analysis period. And this may include replacement of existing equipment upon failure with code compliant equipment. For the alternative cost, really, this is all costs and benefits associated with implementing additional energy efficiency features. And all costs and all benefits of implementing EEMs required by Section 9 should be captured by the analysis. To lay this out a little bit further, really, you're going to potentially have 4 different base case scenarios that you're dealing with when you're setting up these EEMs. The first one occurs whenever the existing equipment is at its end of remaining useful life in the current year. In that case, your base case would assume a replacement. And that that replacement would be a code minimum or in-kind replacement. And so that base case cost would take that investment cost and compare it to the investment cost of the alternative in the EEM. So it's really a net or incremental cost. The second scenario is delayed replacement. So if your existing equipment is not currently at its end of useful life, but will be at its end of remaining useful life within the measure life of the alternative in the EEM, you would also need to take in consideration a code minimum or like-for-like replacement. And I'm going to show examples of these here in the next couple of slides. The third example is replacing existing equipment that is not at and will be at its end of remaining useful life within the measure life of the alternative. And in this case, you may not have any clear base case scenario like investment cost. You may have periodic major maintenance or O&M to maintain the current systems, but there's no capital replacement cost as part of the base case. So the fourth and final one is an EEM for new equipment or systems that do not currently exist. The best scenario I can give you is if you're installing solar, where solar doesn't currently exist. The base case isn't going to have any investment cost or initial capital cost expenditures. It's only going to be the initial investment cost of the alternative that's used when evaluating what your simple payback is. And once again, I will provide a few examples here in the following couple of slides. Next slide, please, Dylan. All right. Sorry. So one of the key notes within the standard is that a comprehensive list of individual EEMs may be evaluated using simple payback as a screening criteria. EEMs determined not to have a simple payback that is greater than the EEM's measure life may be excluded from further consideration. So because of that, when we look at the simple payback calculation and formula, we've used NIST, or National Institute for Standards and Technology, Handbook 135, Section 6.4.4, Equation 613, and that equation is laid out here. The key variables in this include the delta IO, so the incremental cost difference between the base case and alternative are applicable. Delta EO, so the incremental energy savings in both electricity and natural gas created by the alternative. Now, I think a lot of people are going to ask this question. There's delta WO, which deals with water cost savings. This is included in the equation in NIST when water cost savings are being evaluated. For the requirements of our Clean Building Performance Standards, delta WO can be omitted. We're not interested in water cost savings. And then finally, there's delta OM&R, which is the incremental savings in O&M, if applicable, it's associated with the alternative. Next slide, please, Dylan. All right, so this is a really kind of generic example pulled from NIST 135 for scenarios 1 and 2. And you'll see the base case has an investment cost of $103,000, an annual electricity cost savings, $30,000. I'm sorry, I should say annual electricity cost of $30,000, an annual OM&R cost of $7,000. The alternative is $130,000, $24,000, and $8,000. So when you go down to the actual equation, you can see the alternative is subtracted by the baseline for the numerator, so for the investment cost. And then for the denominator, the baseline case is subtracted from the alternative, and you'll get, as you go through the equation, it's 27,000 over 5,000, or simple payback period of 5.4. And that's for 1 and 2. One thing to note is that in scenario 2, where you do have delayed implementation, simple payback doesn't necessarily account for that at all. That's accounted for in FORMAF. So whenever you're filling out FORMAF, there are entry boxes that allow you to conduct delayed implementation, and you'll delay both the implementation cost and the energy savings being realized as well. But once again, that is for FORMAF. And one thing to note with that is that FORMAF will allow you to evaluate the replacement of existing equipment even before its end of useful life for that scenario 2, if that's the route you want to take. And it does give you credit for, yeah, it should say cost, not cost savings. You're correct. Sorry, saw chat there. But it allows you to take, basically get the residual value calculation for your existing equipment. So there is credit given for replacing equipment whenever it's not currently at its end of remaining useful life. Right, next slide. So this is for scenarios 3 and 4. So in this case, O&M cost here does not include periodic major maintenance, which is non-annual recurring costs associated with upkeep and maintenance of the existing equipment. That would be included in FORMAF. And for scenario 4, there may not be a base cost scenario at all for O&M or even the energy cost piece. You would get the cost savings from, once again, if you're looking at solar for a great scenario 4, you would have the full implementation cost of the solar over the projected energy cost savings based on the measure life of that. And as you can tell, there's a pretty big difference here in how you perform these calculations and what the simple payback is finally. For scenario 3 and 4, whenever you have non-replacement scenarios, the simple payback is much greater. So 26 years in this case. All right, next slide, please. So once you have all of your energy efficiency measures that are cost-effective identified from the audit, those EEMs need to be carried into FORMAF. And Normative Annex X is what basically dictates the methodology and procedures for filling out FORMAF and going through the life cycle cost analysis process. Let's see, I think that's it. So next slide, please. So there may be cases where you're not required to do a FORMAF and you're not required to do a life cycle cost analysis. And those are two scenarios are, if upon implementing all EEMs, the building would meet or be below the EUIT, then an LCCA is not required. You would not need to do a FORMAF. The best way of considering this is basically you're shifting from the investment criteria into meeting the EUIT pathway. The second scenario is exemption X 2.1. So if a building owner decides to implement all identified cost-effective EEMs from the audit, then no lifecycle cost is needed, no FORMAF is required. There are no additional EEMs to consider. There's no additional analysis required. They're ultimately just implementing everything that's potentially available. Next slide, please. All right, and this, as per our standard, all cost-effective EEMs should be implemented and commissioned in accordance with the Washington State Energy Code in section 9.1.2.3 of the standard. The qualified energy auditor or qualified person shall review the commissioning report and certify that the energy efficiency measures are functioning as intended. Okay, so that was a lot of information to go through. I think I kind of want to stop here for the next 5 minutes or so. If you have questions in chat, I kind of want to try to go through those now and answer them as they came in.
Yeah, James, looks like we got a few questions. Number one, from Mike, can the name simple payback be changed to incremental simple payback within the standard since the equation has changed to avoid confusion with the industry?
Yeah, I think it could. The only thing I would kind of go back to say is that the equation as it as it is, as 613 I showed you from NIST, is listed as it is a simple payback equation, not an incremental simple payback equation. There's actually 3 different simple payback equations in the NIST standard, one a very general, one a facility related project, then the one that we're looking at right now, which if you actually go through NIST 135, it's really specific to the fact that the equation that we're recommending everyone use is a really good form of cost-effective analysis, and it's one that, as per NIST, is one that's widely used in practice.
Yeah, and I will follow up with that by saying that it is what we're requiring to be used, not recommending. And it's not likely that we'll change the term simple payback, but the definition maybe is likely to be amended to be provide more clarity of which simple payback calculation from NIST 135 is required for the standard. I think you handled another question from Joe. Shouldn't that say cost, not cost savings? So there was a slide with an error in its text. Dylan, maybe if you can go up a few slides and we can look at that so everybody's on the same page here. Keep going. Next one up. There we go. Yeah, James, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, this should be annual electricity cost because you're taking the difference between the two. So it shouldn't be cost savings.
Thank you. Yeah, it looked like it was corrected on the next slide.
Yep. The ultimate delta EO that you get from taking the difference between the two is the estimated cost savings.
Great. Brian asks, should investment cost include available rebates and incentives?
Yes, yes. And that's actually included in Form F as well. I know it's also included in the audit template form, Form D, where there is a entry block for any tax rebates or incentives. And that should discount further whatever the actual net measure cost is.
Next question from Leah. If we are performing an IGA already at our site, do we need to provide the report to the Department of Commerce for compliance, or just a summary of the energy efficiency measures and all associated forms? James, if you want me to handle that, I can do that.
Well, I would say, so we do require Form D, which is the energy audit template that DOE hosts. And so I think that would be the main reporting requirement is Form D and all the information that's associated in Form D through that template. Luke, if you want to add on to that.
Yeah, you don't need to send us your full investment grade audit report, just a summary of it that's provided by Form D. And Form D is required. You can't submit the IGA report in lieu of Form D. Form D is the energy audit template provided by DOE's Energy Asset Score program, and it's been customized for clean building performance standard use. And that's it for questions so far.
Okay. All right, well, we can move on along. Dylan, next slide, please. Actually, we'll get to, so Joe, I do see your question. We will get to that right at the end here. So the next piece is dealing with verification of compliance. Compliance is verified when the qualified energy auditor or qualified person verifies that. For buildings able to measure their EUI, 12 consecutive months of data demonstrates that 75% of projected savings of the audit have been realized. For buildings not able to measure EUI, there's a verification of savings using methods of, and this, I'm going to give you the acronym. It's IPMVP, so the International Performance Measurement and Verification Protocol. Next slide, please. So when MV is not met by the compliance state, so in this case, you can't meet the measurement and verification requirements by the compliance state. It's not likely that the performance metric of the standard will be met by the scheduled compliance state. Conditional compliance may be pursued to avoid penalty. Conditional compliance is a method of compliance that demonstrates all mandatory requirements of the standard have been implemented, but verification has not been measured by the compliance state. This includes the energy management plan, the O&M program, as well as all cost-effective energy efficiency measures. Applications for conditional compliance must be submitted to Commerce 180 days prior to the scheduled compliance date. And verification of energy savings shall be evaluated within 15 months of completion of the implementation of identified energy efficiency measures. Next slide, please. So if compliance is not achieved through M&V, if within 15 months following the completion of implementation of required EEMs, compliance is not achieved through M&V, applicants shall either 1, implement additional cost-effective EEMs that reduce the subsequently measured energy savings of the package of EEMs so that it meets or exceeds 75% of the energy savings projected in the energy audit, or use the IP MVP methodology. Or finally, third, if the applicant's done neither 1 nor 2, Commerce could revoke the conditional compliance. Next slide, please. So phased implementation. I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier about delaying the implementation of EEMs. The standard does allow the building owner to include phased implementation of EEMs, such that the building owner is not required to replace a system or equipment before the end of its equipment's useful life. In this case, if you are going through phased implementation for conditional compliance, in addition for that conditional compliance application, the phase implementation of the EEM should be documented in Form D, so the energy audit template, reflected on Form F using the appropriate delay years, and documented in the capital management plan of the capital management plan as well as the EMP. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a quick example of what it looks like to actually do phase implementation in Form F. On the 11th of July, we're going to be doing another training. I'll be hosting that, where I actually walk through line for line how to fill out Form F block by block and go through all the different scenarios that may come up. So I'm going to be really high level here. But in this case, we have a boiler. We have an implementation cost of the base case cost of $10,000. The boiler's expected measure life would be 15 years if installed. The current existing equipment has 2 years left on it. So in the cost of implementing bundled measures, this is where your EEM data goes into, your alternative case. So we have boiler listed as phase implementation. We have the amount of the energy efficient alternative boiler, so 17,500. Once again, this one also has a measure life of 15 years. As indicated, it has 2 years of delay. So that this isn't going to be implemented for another 2 years. So at the end of the remaining useful life of the existing equipment. Next slide, please. In addition to entering in the delay and the cost and scheduling, you also need to make sure that you're entering in any delayed cost for energy savings as well. So in this case, your base case scenario would be your existing, and then for your alternative, really what you'd be doing is it may be the existing up until a certain point. So if you do happen to enter a delay years in the slide above where it shows years of delay for the alternative, this red text will let you know that you need to enter in a delayed energy cost savings as well. So there is at least a warning here to let you know that you need to do that as you go through the process. Next slide, please. So phase implementation and reporting. So whenever you go down the route of phase implementation, you do need to conduct annual reporting. So it's required whenever measurement and verification extends 1 year or more beyond the compliance state, or implementation is extended phase implementation. In addition to annual reporting for phase implementation, there's also a completion reporting requirement once all conditions of compliance have been verified and documented. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so these are the associated forms that are required for the investment criteria, and you'll notice that there is some variance whenever there's with a measurable EUI versus without a measurable EUI. Like the EUIT, A, B, C are all required. With the exception of without a measurable EUI, C may not be required. If you see here for note 4, you may need to enter a reason statement in the notes section describing why an EUI cannot be measured for the building. And that would take place of Form C. You also require Form D and F, so D being that energy audit template we've discussed, and Form F being the lifecycle cost analysis tool. In addition, everything else pretty much remains the same. You need an O&M program, documentation, EMP plan. There's an O&M reporting tool and the EMP reporting tool. All right, next slide. Okay, so it's only 11:27. I feel like I rushed through that a little bit. I don't know if I spoke too fast for anyone, if there's anything that I need to reiterate, and obviously any other questions that we have plenty of time, and I really like the more questions the merrier, honestly.
All right, James, we do have a few new questions. Let's start with Joseph, why not allow inclusion of water savings as the discretion of the QEA? So the qualified energy auditor. Operational cost is not energy, but we recognize it's a valid cost consideration. Or is the assumption that water savings will be negligible in relation to other savings?
It's a really good question, and Luke, I may need your help a little bit on this one, but from what I understand, water cost savings isn't part of the overall calculation with regards to the standards of meeting the EUIT.
Yeah, it is a good question, Joe. I'm not, I think it might be something we'll follow up with. I can see the validity if a actual individual energy efficiency measure that's saving energy is also saving costs related to water consumption. That could be valid, whether it's, so it could be, for example, there could be, trying to think of an example, maybe low flow fixtures could save heating energy as well as it'll save the amount of water use. So next question. What about buildings that don't have many EEMs to implement? They perform the EEMs but don't meet target. Do they pay a fine?
No, they do not. As long as they're implementing all EMs are identified as being cost effective, or in the case of the exception that I mentioned, if they implement all the EEMs that have been developed from the level 2 energy audit, then that is meeting compliance.
Yeah, there's an exception in section 9.1.1 that talks about buildings with energy targets that do not meet their energy target can comply through the investment criteria of Annex X. Again, that's section 9.1.1. Next question from Derek. Is there any compliance period or energy use cap variance available for small, distressed, or rural businesses? James, I'll go ahead and answer that question. There is no variance or energy use cap for small, distressed, or rural businesses. However, there are exemptions for financial distress, financial hardship. Those are located in section Z 3.1 of the standard. On our website, we also have various different guidance documents appropriate for each of those different exemptions, one of them being financial hardship, and there's actually a few subcategories of financial hardship you can review as well. Okay, next question. Can we use the connected buildings path with the investment criteria and using the aggregate EY and target EY? Does a group of buildings qualify as having measurable EY if there is 1 meter? Good question. So I don't believe you would want to use the investment criteria when using the connected building compliance pathway. Connected building pathway includes buildings that are not tier 1 buildings. So if you have connected buildings that include tier 2 buildings or even buildings smaller, if you pursued the investment criteria for the tier 1 buildings through the connected building path, you would have to do a level 2 energy audit on all of those buildings. So it's likely you would just implement the investment criteria to the tier 1 buildings in those cases. And second part of this question would be, does a group of buildings qualify as having a measurable EY if there is 1 meter? Yeah, the connected building pathway was introduced in the legislation rule development for House Bill 5722 last fall, which is the tier 2 rulemaking. We made some amendments to the tier 1 requirements at that time as well, allowing for more flexibility. So this included this connected buildings pathway for compliance. That means if you happen to have a group, a collection of buildings connected to a master meter. They could be all tier 1 buildings. They could be a combination tier 1, tier 2 buildings, or all sorts of different sizes of buildings, both covered buildings and not covered buildings. This connected building pathway allow you to comply at that connected building level. So all the buildings connected to a master meter without having to sub-meter the tier 1 buildings out in order to pursue compliance for those buildings. That's a good summary of it. We've got more information on connected buildings, compliance pathways coming out in the guidance document soon. Next question from Brian. What is an audit? What if an audit does not reveal any cost-effective energy efficiency measures?
So, in that case, if there are no EEMs or no EEMs to implement, there's nothing cost-effective that the building owner can do. From my perspective, looking at that, then they are in compliance if no EEMs can be developed. Luke, if you want to weigh in, if there's anything else on that, but.
Nope, yeah, you got that right. So yeah, simple payback is a screening measure. Let's say simple payback does not reveal any measures that pay for themselves in savings over the life of that measure. Then you would not need to pursue the life cycle cost analysis or Form F. However, if there are measures that go past the screening into the life cycle cost analysis, and it's there that those measures are not, none of them are found to be cost effective, you would just need to implement the energy management plan, operations and maintenance program, and benchmark and report your energy audit in Form D and your life cycle cost analysis in Form F. Okay, question. Can you revisit the qualified person / auditor? What is the best path for licensing through the state?
Yeah, let me see, what slide is that for? I believe it's, Dylan, can you go to slide 7? I think this lists out the actual roles and responsibilities. Sorry, if you're looking for the actual energy audit guidelines for the energy auditor, that's slide 11. That shows the credentialing requirements here. So it is someone that has training experience and 3 years professional experience in building energy auditing in any one of the following. So they could be a licensed PE or architect. Obviously the building energy assessment professional through ASHRAE, certified energy auditor through AEE, a certified energy manager through AEE as well, and an energy management professional EMP certified by EMA. In terms of licensing for the state, Luke, I'm not sure. I don't think I have anything else to add on that, but these are the main,
Yeah, there are no state certifying credentials for qualified energy auditor, and there is no state qualifying entities for the qualified person either. This presentation does not have that slide, but you can find those credentials within the definitions of qualified person within the section 3 of the standard. They're very similar to this. A qualified energy auditor can also be the qualified person. So having that credential is relevant to the qualified person credential as well. Okay, next, can you slowly repeat the 4 different simple payback uses again?
Yep, I can, absolutely. So to walk this through, the best way I find is kind of to group them. So you have scenario 1 and 2 and scenario 3 and 4. 1 and 2 really occur whenever you have existing equipment that's either at its end of useful life or will be at its end of useful life within the measure life of the alternative. So you have your baseline, your alternative. Your alternative has a measure life associated with it. And for a Form F for the life cycle cost analysis, that actually, the measure life, the longest measure life of any one of the EEMs is determined to be your base period. So for example, if you have 3 EEMs and 2 of them have a measure life of 10 years and 1 of them has a measure life of 20 years, 20 years sets the period of analysis. So going back to these base case scenarios, if the measure life of the alternative is 20 years, if your existing equipment's at its end of useful life now, or will be at its end of useful life within 20 years, you would use this scenario or this type of a calculation where you would include the code minimum or like for like replacement cost in the base case compared to the alternative. Can you go to the next slide real quick, Dylan? For scenarios 3 and 4, this occurs when the existing equipment is not going to be at its end of useful life within that measure life, or it's new equipment that doesn't have existing equipment to compare back to. That's why I keep using solar as an example. Not every building has solar. So if you're looking at installing new solar on a building, then there is no base case cost to compare to. It would be the initial investment cost of the alternative over the projected energy savings it would create. And for 3, the third scenario is really where if you have existing equipment, it's not its end of useful life, but you want to evaluate replacing it anyway, because maybe the energy cost savings would be enough to pay for it, you could do that. It would be very similar to scenario 4 where you may not have a base case cost scenario at all. Hopefully that helps. Or are there any other follow-up on that? I'm to make it a little easier too, I am working on some updated draft technical guidance documents where I go through these 4 cases and provide a little bit more detailed response and examples. There's only so much to fit in a PowerPoint presentation, and I don't want to throw numbers and tables at you while going through this if I can help it.
All right, you got time for a few more questions?
Yep, absolutely.
At this point, okay.
Yeah.
If taking an investment criteria and cost-effective measures, if taking the investment criteria and all cost-effective measures are implemented, but the EUI target is not achieved, is the building considered in compliance since all cost-effective measures were implemented?
Yes. Yes. The investment criteria requires you to implement all cost-effective EEMs. That is how you're meeting compliance. And for lack of better words here, it's showing that you're working towards sort of meeting a target. You're working towards installing EEMs that do reduce your energy use intensity. Obviously, the whole point here is making sure that whatever building owners are implementing is cost effective. We're not asking anyone to implement anything that's not cost effective.
Yeah, so the measurement and verification through the investment criteria is primarily going to be the meeting at least 75% of the predicted savings of those energy efficiency measures. So the energy audit will predict savings associated with those measures. M&V includes documenting that those savings have been met. Next question, if a building is financed by a lender, does the lender have to also approve the implementation of the EEMs? Can a lender prevent the implementation of an EEM if they believe it will substantially affect the value of the building as it relates to the loan?
I think that gets into sort of a legal issue with regards to the building owner and the lender and financier. And I don't believe that's something Commerce can directly respond to. Luke, I'm not sure.
Yeah, the standard certainly doesn't address that directly. So if that's ever the situation, which hopefully any energy efficiency measure will actually increase the value of the building. If that's ever an issue, please contact Commerce and we'll have to put some more thought into that. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, and like was just noted below in chat, so financing is included in Form F analysis, so we can include the finance rate and the loan amount and everything like that as part of the Form F submission.
Well, buildings without cost-effective energy efficiency measures, is that likely to be more closely audited by Commerce? Is there a pre-approval where Commerce can review or ensure it is in compliance? James, do you want me to answer that one?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Yeah. I can't tell you there's going to be more scrutiny on buildings without cost-effective energy efficiency measures. We certainly will look at the energy audit and the life cycle cost analysis for those buildings. If a qualified energy auditor or qualified person or a building owner wants to submit the investment criteria for pre-approval, Congress is more than happy to take a look at that. We've been doing that already, evaluating all sorts of forms required for submittal and responding back to the stakeholder with feedback. Okay, another question. Please confirm that until the standard is updated to include incremental and simple payback definition, that both completed projects and those in progress can continue using the original payback definition, i.e. total ECM costs over cost savings. As an FYI, this change will have big implications on both the ECMs, which we identify as EEMs, if anybody's confused by that, that are now deemed cost effective, as well as the cost to perform the audit. Sorry, I'm scrolling here and losing my place. Audit, since a baseline scenario must now be analyzed for each ECM. James, you may want me to answer this one as well.
I do indeed. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we recognize that the definite simple payback we provided in the standard currently does not have enough specificity to know which simple payback calculation to use from NIST 135. So it's my inclination that that we would need to accept those projects that have already been performed. Now, a little bit of gray areas on whether it just applies to those projects that have been submitted to us or not, but that's something that we'll probably have to put further consideration in and submit something official for that. Next question. Does the simple payback limit apply to measures individually or as the total average simple payback for all measures?
So those EEMs are done individually. The only exception to that may be where there is an instance where you can bundle actions into an EEM if they're related to the same system. And another caveat there is that they have the same measure life. One thing you wouldn't want to do within an EEM is have two or more components that have differing measure lives. One thing to note too is that whenever you're filling out Form F with the EEM information, going back to the example I provided earlier, if you have one measure that's 20 years and the other two that are 10, take note that those two measures that are 10 are going to repeat over the period of analysis, that life cycle cost analysis calculation. So make sure that you're really spot on with those measure lives. Like a good example here is if you're doing commissioning for a new system, you want to make sure that whenever you're including the measure life for commissioning, that you're looking at something that's actually going to be on the ground in terms of commissioning. Like it may not be every 5 years, right? And maybe if there's any major changes to your existing systems or change in environmental conditions.
Okay, a few more questions, James. You good with that? Okay,
Yep.
quick one that I'll answer here from Brian. Are audit grants still tracking for 60 days for response? I'm assuming that's the question is regarding when shall I expect a response from my audit grant question or submittal. The energy audit grant for public buildings is new, and that program is getting a lot of response. That program, the staff running that program are pretty overwhelmed with all the responses. So I would suggest that if you haven't heard back within 60 days, please reach out again to them. And they'll respond as soon as they can. Thank you. All right. Cameron says, can you show the definition of cost effective again? Was it simple payback within the life of the EEM?
Yes. So for something to be cost effective in the EEM analysis, the simple payback has to be at or less than the measure life. So if your simple payback is 10 years and your measure life is 10 years, then that's unity, that's one, it would be cost effective. However, if the simple payback were 11 years and your measure life were 10 years, that would not be cost effective. It doesn't pay for itself within the actual useful life of the EEM itself.
Yeah, and to expand on that, you can look at number 3 here, life cycle cost analysis. That's ultimately, once you've screened the measure and made it through the simple payback for cost effectiveness, it goes into the life cycle cost analysis, which is a more stringent life cycle cost analysis. That's all outlined in Annex X of the standard. Stephen asks, whose definition of measure life are you using? That's a good question. James?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different, measure life is one of those terms like I think it's thrown around and used in a few different areas. And measure life, in terms of looking at EEMs that you're installing, would be the expected service life. And I hate using the term service life and measure life, the expected service life of the equipment. So how long is that equipment going to be running before it is at its failure mode and no longer useful? When you're talking existing remaining useful life for equipment, that's different from measure life. That is an engineering analysis on the existing equipment and conditions and how long that equipment has before it is at its failure mode. So for your EEM, through your baseline case, you'll have an analysis of your existing remaining useful life of your equipment. And then for your EEMs and your alternatives, you'll be analyzing what the measure life should be for the new systems or equipment that you're putting into place. So how long will those systems and equipment last before they need to be replaced fully? Hopefully that provided the correct
Yeah,
answer.
and we actually have provided more definition to what measured life means for new equipment. It's going to be defined by the industry standard ASHRAE document, and we'll provide some published guidance on that here shortly.
To follow up with that really quick, Luke, that ASHRAE life expectancy table, measure life, I think our intention is to look at that as the potential projected measure life of the EEMs, not so much for the existing remaining useful life of the equipment on the ground, right? Like that has to be conducted as part of your audit analysis as you go through and inventory the equipment and systems that are on site and conduct an analysis of how long that equipment will remain functional or useful until replacement is required.
All right, there are no more questions in the chat. Okay, so another question.
Yeah, I see it. It deals with simple payback. And so I think the question that you're asking here, you see my response on individual EEM payback calcs contradicts previous guidance on optimized bundle, such as the bundle meets the savings to investment ratio of greater than 1. So there are 2 different calculations that are going on. For the energy audit, Form D, there's a simple payback analysis that's being done as like a pre-screening measure. So it screens out EEMs that are not cost effective or are cost effective. Those that are cost effective go into Form F. Form F is actually where the savings to investment ratio comes into play. And Form F takes the bundle of EEMs that you've carried forward and analyzes them together collectively. So that's where this savings to investment ratio comes in.
So next question. It looks like Judy's handling it in the chat, but yes, these slides will be available on our website. If you did not register for this event, but got the link elsewhere, you will not get sent the slideshow and recording, but we will post it on our website.
One thing I'd quickly note too, I know it's already been put in chat about asking questions if it didn't get answered here. But yeah, really any questions going through this life cycle cost analysis piece, investment criteria, anything like that, like we are more than happy to address and answer. And I think, like I said earlier, the more questions, the merrier. I know that there's going to be some unique scenarios out there for certain buildings, and I'm here to help figure out how to do that. Next, so not next week, but in a couple of weeks when we do the life cycle cost analysis training, I'm going to try to get through all the different scenarios I can think of the building owners may have, or qualified persons may be going through with regards to delayed implementation, different financing metrics, nonlinear O&M and energy savings. So yeah, the more questions, the better. And yeah, actually, if we want to go through the remaining slides, thanks, Dylan. Let's go up a couple. So yeah, tools and resources. There are 3 documents within the Clean Building Performance Standard document library that are pretty helpful here for investment criteria. The investment criteria with measurable EUI and without measurable EUI. There's also additional conditional compliance document, obviously ASHRAE standard 211. And then the link here, which will be part of the slides that are updated, is a link to that NIST handbook 135. Next slide, please. So we do offer no cost support through our Clean Buildings team. So through our customer support ticket, we answer a whole host of different questions. And we are also more than happy to set up meetings and calls and discuss issues as they come up. Utility provider some accelerator programs. Energy Store Portfolio Manager does customer support and trainings. And obviously there's a Smart Building Center and Building Potential. Next slide, please. And for the rest of the summer training series, the next one is with me again. And like I said, it's life cycle cost analysis. And, once again, kind of repeating this, my goal is to walk through how to fill out Form F using an example project to show you all the step-by-step processes and to get that recording up and, kind of help people see how it's actually intended to be used. Additionally, there's 2 other training series on decarbonization of district energy systems. The first one's July 24th from 11 to noon, and the second one's August 1st from 11 to noon. Next slide, I think that's should be it. Yep, and that's it.
Thanks, James. That was
Yep.
fantastic.
Yep.
I'm not seeing any other questions coming up, and I just want to thank everybody for participating today. And we do need time to process the recording, and then we will be sending it out to those registrants and posting it on our website. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks all.